Good morning. Welcome to Easter Sunday. So when modern writers talk about the resurrection, they usually do so as if it's a one-time moment in history characterized by the discovery of the empty tomb. Kind of the same way we celebrate Easter Sunday, as the church certainly reinforces the notion by setting today apart with all the great music and finery and making it the one day when just about everyone goes to church. Christianity has perhaps unintentionally suggested that the resurrection was a singular event. Think February 22nd, 1732, George Washington's birthday, or April 26, 1865, when Joseph Johnson surrendered to William Tecumseh Sherman just down the road at Bennett Place, or July 21st, 1969, when Neil Armstrong took his first step on the moon. But interestingly, this is not how the resurrection is described in the New Testament, not at all. According to the Gospels, the resurrection was a whole series of events that occurred over a 6 or 7 week period. It didn't happen all at once, but was a reality that was revealed over time. That's why the church has always referred to Easter as a season, and why the next 6 Sundays are known as the Sundays of Easter. Trying to understand the resurrection by looking at the empty tomb story is a bit like trying to understand a whole book by reading only the first chapter. The story's not all there yet. For example, the great joy and sense of victory that we so wonderfully punctuates today's celebration isn't found in the story of the empty tomb at all. That'll come later, in the next chapters, in the next weeks, as the community of faith begins to understand and experience firsthand the resurrected Lord. We're there with Thomas when he says, "Place your hands here and feel my wounds," and who eats breakfast with the disciples on the beach. What characterizes today's gospel is not a sense of celebration, but a profound confusion. Easter begins not in joy, but with confusion at the tomb. Peter Gomes, the once chaplain at Harvard University, made a simple yet poignant point about the resurrection. He said the resurrection is God's way of getting our attention, God's way of getting us to listen up. The empty tomb certainly got Mary's attention. Like you and me, Mary is preoccupied with her thoughts, perhaps worried about the roast in the oven or the guests or both. Her private grief, personal agenda, memories, expectations, and fears are suddenly interrupted by God in a mighty way. Wham! She walks right up into an empty tomb. It's a total, terrible surprise. Life begins, Peter Gomes says, when God gets our attention. Life begins for Mary when she was forced to leave behind the grave of her old expectations, that the good always dies young, that injustice and violence rule the world, that there is life, but it's only a bitter little pill. At first, Mary experiences the empty tomb as a more terrible insult added to injury. "They have stolen the Lord, taken his body out of the tomb," she said to the disciples. Even after encountering 2 angels inside the tomb, Mary still doesn't get it. Finally, the Lord himself appears to her. At first, she thinks he's the gardener. But then he tells her, "Mary, why are you weeping?" Suddenly, she grasps the significance of the experience. God got her attention. And she tells the other that she has seen the Lord. I think what we have here is the first and incredible Easter story from John, is a story about a resurrection of Jesus and how that extraordinary event begins to transform the lives of those who follow him. It's not only Jesus' body that gets raised on Easter morning, it's Mary's life and the disciples. They are also getting raised. John wants his readers to grasp that there is a new force in the world with the power to overcome death and to bring new life to all those who believe. In John's Gospel, Mary Magdalene is found visiting the tomb of Jesus only to find the stone rolled away. Her immediate reaction is to run to Simon Peter and to John. They have taken the Lord out of the tomb. This news is disheartening, and so is now Peter and John who turn to run. The Gospel's description has a race feeling. It seems proud to claim that John is the first to reach the tomb, the younger after all. Although John leans down to view the inside of the tomb, he does not go in. It's Peter who, upon his arrival, who enters the tomb first. Only then does John enter, and he saw and he believed, and their lives were changed forever. The cross event is critical in the disciples' understanding of who Jesus is. All four Gospels indicate the disciples' difficulty in understanding Jesus' parables, Jesus' healing, and Jesus' predictions of the cross. Even Jesus mentions that only the resurrection will bring understanding to the disciples. It takes this event, this resurrection, to clarify who Jesus is and the nature of God. Jesus came to liberate us from death. Our God is a God of life. As shocking as this experience must have been, Peter and John leave Mary Magdalene standing outside the tomb, and she stays there weeping. Now's their moment. She's all alone. Now it's Mary's turn to peer into the tomb. And there she sees two angels. "Woman, why are you weeping?" they ask. Mary expressed her fear that someone has taken Jesus' body to the angels. At that moment, she turned to see a man standing behind her whom she thought to be a gardener. He repeated the angel's question, "Woman, why are you weeping? Who are you looking for?" So she began to accuse the man of taking the body when he called her name, Mary. We are known by our name. We are known by what we are called. And she knew the way he said her name. For it was at that moment that Mary knew this to be Jesus. She wanted to embrace him, but Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, because I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." So Mary becomes the first to share the story of the resurrection. James and John, they heard it. The story doesn't say anything about them going on to tell about it. It was Mary. She can't help herself but to tell everyone she saw, "I have seen the Lord." Charles Dickens' immortal classic, A Christmas Carol, is one of the best Easter stories in a non-biblical literature. Kind of caught you by surprise on that one. The story may take place at Christmas time and be one we traditionally tell at Christmas. It even has Christmas in its title. But it's not about Christmas. Instead, it's all about Easter. Think about it. The story describes the transformation of Ebenezer Scrooge, a man whose old life, characterized by pettiness and greed, is transformed into a new life characterized by giving and joy. And Scrooge finds himself at the site of a tomb when it finally takes place, too. When the phantom shows Scrooge his grave, The old is shattered by the reality of what he sees. His face becomes, as Dickens tells it, and I quote, wet with tears. Kind of like Mary. And the piercing remorse smashes through him, exposing the childlike soul buried for so very long. That's a resurrection story, plain and simple. Dickens may have said it at the Christmas season and evoked vicious Christmas stories as a catalyst for change. But what he describes is nothing less than the force that Mary and Peter and so many others throughout history, including many of us whose lives have been altered, encountering the Easter miracle. It is the force of Christ risen from the dead. This morning, this first morning of the Easter season, we are reminded of something very important. Veiled by all the finery and the celebration, the bunny rabbits and the colored Easter eggs, before it blooms into joy, resurrection will always appear amidst chaos when we are confounded by grief and despair, or pierced through the heart by some terrible remorse. So if you've come here today to be convinced of the meaning of an empty tomb, don't be surprised if you leave knowing little more than Mary when she first arrived there. Why should you know more? You have to look further into the Easter story and into the lives of everyday people. And the church can help. We can show you a multitude of lives transformed, a whole host of people who have died any number of emotional and spiritual deaths and yet live on joyfully in the power of God. I can show you a surgeon who was changed from a self-described, mean-spirited, uptight, brilliant professor who once enjoyed life into a fun-loving, compassionate father almost overnight. I can show you a person whose life has gone down the drain following a painful divorce, who suddenly finds an inner strength and sense of hope that never dreamed possible. I can show you a young insurance salesman with an alcohol problem who is now an Episcopal bishop. I can show you a lawyer named Augustine who dabbled in cultic worship when he wasn't chasing women, but whom God transformed into a father of modern theology. I can show you a hot-headed fisherman named Peter who became the rock of a church when it was founded. And I can show you an enslaver named John who, through the power of forgiveness, penned a hymn called Amazing Grace. I could go on and on, mentioning some who are famous and some whom you've never heard of. And you could probably do the same for me. But in all cases, it's the same thing repeatedly. Individuals who were once despairing, disillusioned, and perplexed, but became, by the power and grace of God, joyful, purposeful, and infused with hope. As Paul says, we are witness to these things when we begin to understand resurrection. So yes, resurrection begins in the tomb. That's where God gets our attention. And it's his risen life is first revealed. But there's more to come. Welcome to the season of the resurrection.